I found Alan in the hall without a pass. He said you were wasting time schmoozing. Why aren't you reading a magazine?
I was about to try a wacky new concept, teaching.
Oh, I'm a cat. I'm a sexy cat.
Welcome, everyone. Oh, gosh. Man, some of those shows. All right, tonight we are going to talk about actually, we're not going to talk about movies. Let's talk about TV since we're on TV dinners. We're going to talk about TV. Back in the very early inception of the sitcom, the drama series, the made-for-TV shows that were miniseries, because movies were too long. There were lots of different kinds of storytelling going on. Today, which we'll get into, we have some really strange and new methods of telling the same time-honored stories. I'm your host, Jen. I am in Hawaii, where it feels like it is 100 degrees at least. And in the tropics, that's not such a good thing. I am joined by Betty. Betty, please, we need to get a temperature check. Where are you and how cold or hot is it?
I would say it's probably 80s here, but I'm in the trees, so I'm assuming it's probably cooler in the woods.
So we will rename Betty Jane for Tarzan and Jane since she's in the trees. Welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here. And Tori, welcome back. We're really happy to have you back.
Yeah,
How are
yay.
you?
I'm good. Let's see, temperature wise, it was like upper 80s. It was nice. It was kind of cloudy. It was not a beautiful day, but it was a nice day.
Well, I'm super jealous because while the rest of you on the mainland mostly were suffering through the heat wave, we weren't. We were having really nice days, but now apparently those days are gone and it's caught up with us. So kind of feels like living inside the volcano instead of on the volcano. Not really exciting. Okay, we're gonna dive right into our topic because I want to have lots of time to discuss this. What I want to sort of center around and give me some ideas and thoughts about this is the way that we used to do storytelling. And so let's start really in the 50s and the 60s, right? I mean, the 50s had its own sort of flavor, but it really did carry over to the 60s, where we had sitcoms and drama series that had one central idea around them, and you can insert whatever you want as the central idea, and then all of the characters kind of flittered around that central idea. Sometimes the central focus point was a specific place, somebody's house, the newsroom, someone's farm. It was all very centrically located, a starship. um, and then you have the characters kind of moving in and around it. But what you didn't have was a lot of character arc development. If your characters weren't the same in season 1 as they were in season 2, the thought was the audience would be confused. They couldn't grow. What is this thing called growth? We don't have character arcs here. We don't believe in that kind of thing. It's a very interesting time, I think, in television. So I want to ask the both of you, give me some perspective on what you think the shows in the 50s and the 60s felt like. You don't need to compare them to what we're doing today, but what did they feel like to you? What do you think, Betty?
I'm not sure what you mean by the question.
Well, did they feel? I'll give you an example. So, one of the shows that I remember seeing, although I wasn't around when the show was made, one of the shows I remember seeing youngest that I saw each episode of was Star Trek. And Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, they don't change. They're the same characters that they were in episode 1 as they were in the
So
last season.
maybe I would say they feel episodic. So
Mhm.
like it's more about a situation in an episode as opposed to the character's overall development.
Well, I guess how do you like those? Do you like that kind of presentation? Like, what is your feeling about it? Do you enjoy watching the characters being static because the repetition allows you to kind of get to know then the story around it instead of having to focus on the characters?
I guess it depends because some of my favorite shows are character driven, like Handmaid's Tale, and the story arc and how they develop. But at the same time, I still like watching shows like I Love Lucy and Modern Family, which I would say they probably mostly stay the same, things like that.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yes.
So
Now,
it's like you guys.
I will say, I will say, since Josh has Star Trek up on the screen and we get to see a full grown Gorn, um, in this newest series, which is Star Trek, Strange New World.
Yeah, yep. We've been
Uh,
watching that. Yes.
there is a lot of Gorn activity. We don't really get to see too much of them, except for in a couple later episodes. But there's a lot of Gorn activity, and it kind of makes me a little bit nostalgic to go back to the guy in the full body prosthetic suit because, whew, man, have we ever come a long way? That was a great shot to put in because TV now and then, man, there's no, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. Okay, what about you, Betty? I'm sorry. What about you, Tori? Tell me how you feel about the older style of TV series where there really isn't a lot of character growth, but where there's something new episodically happening every week.
I don't I like it in some instances, but sometimes like I want the characters to grow up. Like maybe they're kids and I want to see
Mhm.
them as adults and like the show had been on long enough that they should have been, you know, but I understand that's just like the formula that they use, I guess. I don't know. I would kind of like to see the growth in, but a lot of shows do that. They keep the characters the same age, like
It,
Family Guy, and
mhm.
you know, a lot of yeah. I don't know.
Because that does definitely harken back to a pre well, I don't even know what decade I would actually assign this to specifically because it was a sort of a slow evolution. Um, but Prestige TV, which we talked about before, had a lot to do with how we view what we consider to be both character arcs and story development. And full story development now has gotten to the point where writers feel confident enough to create 6 or 7 seasons of a show and say, okay, I've got this story mapped out now, and all I need is for someone to come along and pick it up, which is kind of interesting. Um, and I also feel like at this point, at least where we are now, we would, if we saw shows like I Love Lucy or like Leave It to Beaver, and they had been just simply respun with a modern cast, we would find them very provincial and simplistic. Like, why are you trying to dumb down my TV? Which is kind of interesting because when we look back at them sort of in retrospect, I don't feel like we think that way. I don't watch the Munsters and feel like there is something wrong with uh any of the characters not growing. I just it does I mean maybe because they're monsters, that could be. But no, I really don't find, their lack of growth to be disturbing in any way. Um but I do notice that there are some situations where we do kind of, especially during the 70s, where we do sort of start getting a little bit of character growth. Eh, Although it's not episodic, it's more like within the episode, the character grows to the point where you're like, oh, okay, maybe there's some hope for them. And the one that I'm thinking of here is All in the Family. Have you guys seen All in the Family?
Great
All right.
show.
So
But
every once in a while, Archie Bunker goes through a little progressive growth spurt. And he says, "Oh, okay, I get it." It's few and far between, and he still reverts back to being, basically the 1970s version of a Trump supporter. But it's really cool to me to see that at least there's some of that happening. Um, what do you guys have any other shows that you can think of where it's like just little bits of growth that are happening inside of an episodic TV series? I
I
mean, I
would say
can.
How I Met Your Mother, because that's also a little bit insulting of a show. It didn't age well either.
That's true. How I Met Your Mother definitely was well. See, it's episodic, in one way, but it's also there is a story. There's an overarching story there. Maybe that '70s show sometimes it feels like a rerun of a '70s sitcom where there really isn't a ton of growth. It's
True.
just people living out their lives, episode after episode after episode.
Right.
Even the show Alf. Do you remember the show Alf?
That
Yes.
show gave me the creeps because he eats cats.
Yes, because he eats cats.
And I can't
Um,
watch it.
I, even Alf, who you would think would grow, uh, both just in terms of how he deals with the world in the most comedic way, or how he assimilates into the family. No, there's none of that. He doesn't. It's just he has the same ideas over and over and over again. But if we compare that to an earlier alien show, Mork and Mindy,
Yes.
at
I
the
love
end of
Mork and
ep-
Mindy.
right, and at the end of every episode of Mork and Mindy, Mork reports back to Ork and says sometimes the most profound things that he has encountered about human beings. And it does, although I'm sure they don't write it that way, it does feel like subsequent episodes kind of step off of that, which I thought that was actually kind of cool. I did kind of like that. I think once we get to the serial dramas, that's when we start seeing real growth, right? Did any of you guys ever watch Dallas
Mm-mm.
or Dynasty?
Yeah, I saw a little bit of Dynasty before. Yeah, a little bit.
But so there's a famous Time magazine cover, I think. That I mean, an actual Time magazine cover that says "Who shot Jr."
You know what? I've never seen Dynasty. I was too young, but I know what Time article you're talking about. I've heard that.
It definitely transcends history, yes. But that one had some character arc story power, right? And there's no way you can shoot a character and then not have there be repercussions and changes in the cast afterwards. So that was kind of interesting. Um Moving into sort of the 1980s, 1990s phase, kids TV stays the same. Kids TV is still rerunning episodic visions of basically the same thing. We don't have a lot of change there because I think writers don't expect that kids want that or can even really perceive it as well as adults. But we do start seeing some changes, right? Um, I do want to sort of circle back though. I want to go back to Betty, your choice, which is Mary Tyler Moore. And tell me what you think about the Mary Tyler Moore character and how she was presented as a woman in an era that was struggling, I would say, with feminism. What did you think about that character? Because I feel like that's also kind of an integral part of TV now and then.
I would say I think at the time she was supposed to be progressive. I guess she still would be a progressive woman at a time when she's supposed to be getting married. She's getting a job.
Right?
I think it sort of transcended the period. Like she wasn't a housewife, even though
She
she
had a
came from
nice
she was a
house.
Yeah, she had that
She had a
loft,
super apartment. Damn.
and then And then she had that she stole right out from underneath Rhoda.
Mm-hmm.
You know that was a problem. Um, yeah, it was really cute. It was really cute, and I always wanted a life like the one she had where she went to Minnesota. She was the one in Minnesota, right? Or is
Mm-hmm.
it that girl?
Oh, I don't. Is
I
it?
think she goes to Minnesota. Anyway,
Yes.
but yeah, but and then also so she was like pushing, like it was also a time where women weren't supposed to be having jobs, and so she goes out and moves out on her own, and I don't know, that was supposed to be cutting edge TV back in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Mary Tyler Moore is Minnesota. In fact, I just remembered that there is a Mary Tyler Moore statue in Minneapolis.
Oh, how did I not see that?
Yes, there is a Mary Tyler Moore statue in Minneapolis. I don't know why I forgot that, but yes, that's there. Um, and I agree. That absolutely is one of those like it, it's like some shows really tried to be a lot more progressive in their nature, and they were so rewarded for it, right? Because audiences ate it up. I mean, they loved it, really loved it. Um, Tori, let's
I
talk
still
about
love
your
it.
show. Yeah,
Okay.
you know, it's funny because the jokes in Mary Tyler Moore sometimes didn't, they obviously still didn't age well. Still, they weren't aging well at the time. But part of that is the misogyny of the day that now lets us even watch the show and see it for the misogyny that existed then and still exists now, so we have this like central point of empathy for it, which I think is also very interesting. um so Tori, your show, tell first of all, tell us about why you chose this show to be a representation of TV then, and then let's talk about how this particular type of series has changed.
Okay, so I chose Mr. Ed. I was very much a fan of him whenever I was younger because he was a talking horse and I loved horses and it was great. So I loved this show because it's so simple. Like every episode is some shenanigans with the horse. Like it's playful, harmless, nothing dramatic happens and it's a good TV show for kids, I think.
I actually like a couple of things with Mr. Ed. First of all, the horse always has the right wisdom, which
Mm-hmm.
always to me feels a little bit like Aesop, like it's an Aesop table, or Aesop table, like it's an Aesop fable kind of come to life. I do really like that. I feel like that's good.
Yeah.
But I also really like it because there is something so simple about the central comedy that, and it really doesn't deviate very much. And it also incorporates enough slapstick to make it very, it's so identifiable to its time. I feel like comedy in the 60s and early 70s was a combination of, how funny can you make the puns and jokes, but also can you do slapstick, which is
Mm-hmm.
just a crazy combination, and it kind of works for some shows. So I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think about a show like The Twilight Zone? Do you, because we have an awful lot of resurgence now with anthology shows, and sometimes they work and sometimes they really don't, but it's interesting to me that the Twilight Zone really took a chance on something that other shows, other formats weren't willing to take a chance on. Outer
Yes.
Limits was
Outer
also,
limits.
yeah,
Yes.
but
Mm-hmm.
they all kind of followed the same format, even if the material was a bit different. And I wonder, what did you guys think about that, or what do you think about that?
I love the Twilight Zone. I was actually an honorable mention. I wanted to talk about it anyway, just because it was, this was the beginning of horror. like the classic horror that we know, like Dracula and Swat Man, and you know, uh, all the other ones, werewolves and stuff. So to have a show that kind of captured all the abnormal stuff that was happening in the 50s, like UFOs and the Roswell
Hmm.
incident and all that stuff, I think it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see, and it caught my attention. You know, made me want to read Goosebumps whenever I was little.
Yeah. That, you know what? You're right, actually. That, and Goosebumps has that very same episodic feel to it. What about you, Betty?
I love it. I like being able to watch an episode and it's very of its time. So it looks like you're watching a set from like a new set that was built to be retro when really it's it's from the actual time or from the era. And I like that the episodes make you think. Like it actually reminds me of Tales of the Crypt
Yes,
when they're
Yeah.
yes.
at the end.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
So, an interesting thing about anthology series that I keep running into over and over again is one, they are always a product of their time. Because in order to capture kind of the zeitgeist, you need to, well, I mean, actually, that's kind of redundant. In order to make something viewable by an audience in sort of a wide swath, it needs to be part of the zeitgeist. You have to actually capture something that is interesting or unique enough that people will tune in and go, what is this about? Without upending like the format of the show. So Twilight Zone to me, in fact, every year, although I don't know if they do it anymore, but every year they used to do on Sci-Fi, I think it was, they would have 24 hours of the Twilight Zone. And so for 24 hours, you could tune in and watch every single Twilight Zone ever made. It was really amazing. For years, we used to watch that. And if you compare the old Twilight Zone with the stuff that we now see as being sort of the new anthology series, you run across a number of differences, not just in the material presented, but also in the format by which people are being engaged with it. So the Twilight Zone itself is sort of small vignettes of stories where people are speaking about things, doing things, encountering strange and alien ideas, and that's awesome. But they're all sort of self contained in their own little worlds. Current anthology series tend to run around a central theme point. So even the new American Horror Stories, that anthology series, is loosely, it seems to me so far, based on urban legends, and they run through the gamut of urban legends. That's super interesting, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there. But I wonder, oh yes, thank you, Josh. Black Mirror. There's a lot of. I'm wondering what you guys think about the current content in anthology and how that kind of changes what we think about in terms of the presentation of an anthology. Like, do you guys like it when it's more generalized, or do you like it when it's more specific and it rotates around a theme? What do you think, Betty?
I have no idea. Maybe a theme.
I actually tend to agree with you on that one. What about you, Tori?
I like the theme thing too. Like the Golden Girls, for going that route. That was another honorable mention because I
But do,
love that show.
but do,
Designing women.
but okay, but that's a sitcom, right? And that's a comedy sitcom. That's definitely not an anthology. So an anthology
Yes.
are unrelated stories, right? And Golden Girls is
Oh,
always the same story because
oh,
it's always about the same people.
yes.
She
Okay,
said
no,
Golden
never
Girls.
mind.
I had to say Designing Women.
Yeah, those. Okay,
Designing women.
yeah.
I recently watched an anthology series called Number Nine.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever seen it. but it basically is an anthology series that uh what's a good way to say this? There's always the number 9 I'm sorry, it's called Inside Number 9, not Number 9. Inside Number 9. It's an anthology series. It's got a couple of seasons. It started in the UK. And the number 9 is always present. So it could be somebody's 9th birthday. It could be the house is on 9th Avenue. It could be the house is actually number 9. It could be there are 9 donuts that feature prominently in the whatever it is. 9 is always an underlying thematic point. And some of them are so good. Like as standalone stories, they absolutely this one was excellent, by the way. The two bumbling burglars. Oh my god, this was just hilarious. And by the time that you get to the end of each one of these, some crazy revelation is made to the point where you're like, you cannot walk into any one of these anthology episodes and think that you're going to know what's going to happen. You just don't. I highly,
What was
highly,
that
highly
show?
recommend it. Inside Number 9.
Okay.
And I want to say that there's like 3 seasons. There might be more actually. But I think, actually, you know what? I think there's way more. I think there's 7 altogether. Because the last time that we saw, oh yeah, it is 7. Because the last time that we saw one, we were on series 6, and we had just heard that they were setting out a new one. So I haven't seen the new series, the new season, but it's got to be good. It's always good. Okay, so we did anthology. We kind of did a little bit of the older series sitcom. Let's talk about drama. I mentioned Star Trek because Star Trek is definitely very drama. Some of the drama that happened in the 50s and 60s in comparison to what we have today is, first of all, so super light. The intensity of what is happening, you can really feel that they dial things back a lot. We are exposed at this point to so much, both rich content and also very emotional content. And I don't feel like we've always had that level of emotional content before. But tell me, what do you guys think? What do you think, Tori?
I hmm. I don't know. That's a hard question. You always get me with at least one of them every episode.
I'm sorry, it's not intentional, I swear.
Okay, explain it in a different way. Maybe I'm just not computing it right.
Well, I have one, I think.
Okay.
Zoe's Infinite Playlist,
Oh, that's a good one.
which is like, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. Which is very, very sad and also very funny, and like music, just like it's a comedy, but also it made me cry.
It does deal with a lot of heavy subjects.
Yes.
So in my personal opinion, when I think drama, I think like Law and Order. Like that's like the first thing that comes to mind. Like
So definitely, I think crime procedurals are 100% drama. They absolutely are. They you can subgenre them in lots of different ways, but for sure, the top umbrella is definitely drama. So that's one of them. But let's take an example. Let's go from do you remember the show called Adam 12? Did you ever see
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's an old black and white. There's two cops that are out on a beat, and they go to all these different places, and each week there's something different about what they do. Sometimes there's a central theme to their, whatever they're looking for, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a random series of events, right? Emergency was one where they were the paramedics on a fire truck, and Emergency is one that I remember. I actually remember seeing that show. I don't remember understanding it, but I remember thinking the guy was cute. And that was another one where, like, the central theme of the episode was, something was happening and they had to resolve it by the end of the episode. But the level of emotional investment that you have is usually only self-contained to the episode, right? As we have moved forward in television storytelling, wow, we have really changed how we decide that we need to be invested in a character. So, as an example, Dragnet's another great example. Thank you, Josh. Um, uh, as we have moved forward with storytelling in this particular sense, just watching an episode of Law and Order SVU, you, even if you don't need to know everybody's backstories, everybody has a backstory. Everybody has, for the most part, a fairly troubled past, some, self-contained horror that has either happened to them or is currently happening to them. And it's
Olivia
an
Benson
emotion
is heavy.
it's an
Yeah.
emotional roller coaster of stuff happening at all times. That's what I mean by, we have a lot more heavy stuff happening now than we ever did then. Even though I think, at its heart, a crime procedural is a crime procedural. I mean, Dragnet and Adam 12 are different in a lot of ways from Law and Order SVU, but are they really? I
But
mean,
but
not really.
the law enforcement has changed so dramatically. So how, like, the whole their world, their little crime world, like their homicide detectives, they had to like grow with the times. Like they had, you
Well,
know what
that's
I
true.
mean?
And
But we're
I
also
think,
talking about a lot less.
well,
You kind of
I think
have to be.
I think this is also one of the things that I definitely wanted to talk about coming up next. Here's a central thing to think about. Before, we used to sanitize a lot of how we thought about the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys had a very clear lane to steer in, and they did not cross over into the bad guys' lane unless they were actually irredeemable and were either going to die or going to jail. That was just, you just didn't make your good guys bad guys, and they weren't morally ambiguous either.
Wasn't
Okay,
like Dynasty like the one show that like started the whole like
and
betrayal and
Dallas,
yeah, and
and
like
Dallas,
the okey
yes.
doke, yeah. They were always bringing people back from the dead and shit. Like,
M- moral,
It's
I
I
like
love
feel like
Zena.
moral ambiguity is one of those things that we didn't used to play around with, and now you're actually, as a writer, usually not doing a good job if your characters are too cookie cutter, if they're too black and white, if they don't have moral ambiguity, because we recognize that moral ambiguity is kind of a central facet to everyone at some time. So we all experience it, we all struggle with it, we all work through it, and therefore it has to be represented. Back in the 50s and the 60s, and even in the early 70s, that was not allowed. I still remember seeing an episode of Hill Street Blues, I think, where one of the officers got into trouble with law enforcement. And it was like, all of the adults around me were like buzzing with how huge that was, because, oh my God, the cop was bad. And, now we're like, well, of course the cop was bad, because, you can't have a crime show without one of the cops being bad.
yeah,
I mean,
somebody's
like,
got to be dirty.
we just don't, we expect such different things out of our storytelling now. I I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't talk about some fantasy worlds, because fantasy worlds, anything can happen in any fantasy land, right? So I particularly am enamored with I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched, right?
Hmm.
I grew up loving those shows. I thought magic was like the coolest thing ever. And as I got older and watched reruns and reruns and reruns, you watch something first when you're a kid in a rerun cycle, and you're like, oh, this is cool and it's new to you and whatever. And then you watch it again as either a teenager or a young adult, and all of a sudden you realize, you know what? I'm getting different messages here. And Bewitched was one of those shows that I've always felt like magic could cure everything. And then as I watched it as a teenager, I realized, oh, wait a minute, that's not the message here at all. The message here is every time Samantha uses magic, something goes wrong. And I kind of liked that as like the overarching metaphor of you can't cure your life isn't going to be easy even if you have magic. There's
You mean
always
rather
going to
than
be
misogyny?
complications. Yeah, well, there's that too. I always thought of Bewitched as kind of being like the precursor to Mad Men,
Yes.
because he also works in an ad agency, and it just always
Yeah.
felt like, oh yeah, this is like Mad Men light over here.
Well, I think if Darren didn't keep getting in the way, I think her magic would have been fine. I think he kept getting in the way and messing everything up. That's my opinion.
I don't know. There were a whole bunch of episodes with Samantha and her family where the magic just got in the way of the magic. It was just
Well, if her
we
mom
don't.
was there, it was on purpose.
Right. Oh, what was the mom's name in Bewitched? She had such a cool name too. And I totally forgot it. But all of them.
Somebody was Drizelda. Drizelda.
Was that her? I cannot remember if that was her name.
I
I
can't
know
remember.
Agnes was the next door neighbor, and I did really love Agnes as the next door neighbor.
Esmeralda.
Esmeralda, thank you. And
Well
I
done.
also really loved Gladys. Gladys and Agnes were like my favorites. I'm sorry,
And then you
not
had Sabrina
Agnes.
the Teenage Witch.
I'm thinking her name is Endora. The actress's
Yeah,
name is
Endora.
Agnes. Endora was her name, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, who can forget Aunt Clara, because she's, I think, I mean,
A
truly.
couple.
I feel like Aunt Clara is sort of like, that's my peak aesthetic now.
I love her so much.
I feel like Aunt Clara almost every day, so I really love
relate.
that. Okay, but
and then
now
you have to compare it to Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yeah. So okay, Betty, what do you think? How do you think that those two compare?
Well, I think both of them have an issue with things going wrong while they're using their magic.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that it's more of a positive message in Sabrina, and I think it's more in women empowerment because she doesn't have a husband to control her. And then you have the aunts who aren't married and living together as old spinsters.
That's true.
And they're very powerful witches. So I think and then you also have the new one who makes them even more powerful. In my opinion, they're powerful.
I would like to mention that during the 70s, the fantasy genre of television was filled with TV shows like Buck Rogers. And man, it was so terrible. It's almost difficult to describe how bad Buck Rogers was. But we also had shows like Space 1999, which was, everybody keeps trying to bring that back, which is weird. We had Dark Shadows. Did you guys ever see the original Dark Shadows?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really creepy stuff, right?
Yeah.
Very creepy. That was super fantasy for the time. We had Wonder Woman, which was also very creepy for the time. But at least they were trying to elevate women in a central role.
And she's queer.
Yeah.
I loved her.
There's this one show that it was like this white family lived in Africa, and they were like, so they were no, they had they ran a safari company, and they would take
Doctari.
Yes.
Yes, Doctari. Yes.
That just reminded me of that. Yeah.
I'm nothing if not a font of ridiculously unhelpful
yes
series information about the 70s and the 80s. Yes, indeed. Okay, so but now moving forward, our fantasy TV series are quite a bit different, and the stakes are so high. I mean, like ridiculously high. I One of my favorites right now, um well, actually, man, it's really hard to pick a favorite, but I'll pick the one that I think does the best job of giving us the fantasy environment without it being um totally over the top. Um Wheel of Time, which is an Amazon series. Wheel of Time is based on Robert Jordan's series of books. It is it is super fantasy. There are different rules that govern the world there that do not exist anyplace else. Men are not allowed to wield magic. Just one of my favorite sticking points of the whole series. Women are all the Aes Sedais. They are absolutely all of the magic wielders, and they have this thing called the Source. Anyway, it's a big fantasy world. Big. When I think about what that representation is, and then I look back at Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and those shows, they feel so small. They feel so little in their containment. Even a story like I Dream of Jeannie, which could have a huge story around it, has such a little tiny environment surrounding it. And I wonder, first of all, how do you guys feel about modern day fantasy? But secondly, how do you feel like it compares? Like, do you like the simpler stuff, or do you like the super more complex and wow, the universe is just going to explode in front of us kind of stuff?
I mean, I love the universe spilling in front of us type of stuff. I'm all for it. Like I like it. I like when people have when characters, I'm sorry, when characters have that ability to be predictable.
Mm,
Like that, that character is going to do that thing because he always does that thing, like Joey Lawrence.
right.
Whoa, like everybody knew him for that. Like I like shows that have like catchphrases and stuff because it's always funny to say like 20 years later.
All right, what about you, Betty?
I guess it would depend, but I do like complicated stories, like where everything is terrifying, but then you have a character that um, nobody can beat, like a McGonagall character.
Hashtag
If that makes sense.
Sandman.
Yeah, I haven't seen Sandman yet.
That's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, more
Okay,
of the
so there you go.
yeah.
Sandman's good.
It is really good. Well, first of all, I mean, credit where credit is due. Neil Gaiman, there's very little that Neil Gaiman does that isn't, even if it just feels like it's an average Neil Gaiman story. Average for Neil Gaiman is like so far above sort of the rest of the content out there that it elevates itself without any help. But Sandman in particular is one of those stories that is, it's what I feel like the DC universe wants to be. It wants to be edgy, which Sandman definitely has aspects of, but it also wants to tell a meaningful story, and it can never seem to get there because the characters get in the way of the story. And in Sandman, both the story and the characters blend so seamlessly together that it makes everything work. In particular, since we're talking about fantasy, I will say that if we compare something like Sandman to what we know is coming soon, and actually, I just saw the new trailer for um, the new Game of Thrones, House Targaryen.
Ooh.
Um, you can have a lot of very complicated story without necessarily the story being great, right? And that is, I think, sometimes what we experienced in TV then, where there was a lot of good storytelling, but it wasn't really complicated. And sort of the reverse of that is today we have a lot of storytelling that feels very complex, but sometimes it just isn't that great. And the fantasy trope seems to really pull a lot of those in. It's if you don't do it right, it just doesn't work. Um, okay, I'm going to ask you guys this question, sort of open ended. So think about it a little bit. Which of the TV shows that you remember seeing that you liked growing up or that you just know of through reruns and things like that would you like to see rebooted for today's times, tackling maybe some today issues or just redone in a way that is a little bit more complex? Let's start with you,
Ooh.
Betty.
What's terrible is I just had one of these and I can't remember.
You know, they say that video games rot your brain, Betty. I'm just throwing that out there. So.
I haven't had a chance to play it very much yet, just a few minutes.
Yeah,
So
see,
it
and
hasn't
that's all
rotted
it
yet.
took. And that's all
That's
it
all it
took.
took.
Just yep.
There you
just
go.
saying.
Fair enough.
No, seriously. Okay, we'll go with Tori. Tori, tell us while Betty ruminates on that.
So what am I? Okay, let me.
What TV show or series that you used to watch as a kid that you like to see redeveloped and redone as maybe a little bit less provincial, maybe with a little bit more story arcs and characters and things like that?
I got one. Melrose Place.
They already redid that one, didn't they?
I don't know if they did. If they did, I did not see it. But yeah, like rebooted that one would be cool. Maybe 90210 too. That one was like
They
a big
definitely
one.
did that one.
They
Yeah.
definitely did 90210. Yes.
Oh, I know, but like, well, how long do they have to wait to like get a reboot episode? You know, like I don't know. I guess they'll have to wait another 20 years or so.
Okay, so reach back to the 50s and the 60s and give me an idea of a show that you would like to see rebooted. I mean, Josh had Green Acres, which I feel like is valid. Green
Our
Acres
dad
is
made
always
us
a
watch
good
that
choice.
show so much as kids.
Who doesn't love Ava Gabor? I don't know how you
Oh,
can
yeah.
not love her. Okay, so what do you think? 50s, 60s, maybe 70s? We could go 70s. 50s, 60s, or 70s?
I really liked My Three Sons. I know that's a weird one to
Hey,
like, but I
no,
really
that's a
liked
good
that.
one.
That
That's a
was
good one. Yes, that's got a lot of good potential in it.
The
Yeah.
Flying Nun.
Oh my God, the Flying Nun. You know, so OT, but definitely par for the course here. I just read an article about the average age of a nun in the United States is 72.
My grandmother, my great aunt was a nun. So when I was 15, I actually went to go stay at the convent out in Arizona for 2 weeks. That went great.
They are definitely not recruiting nuns. And I suppose, we could sort of blame horror movies on this because they don't tend to fare very well in horror movies, but I suspect there might be something more to it. All right, so I actually, Betty, do you have one? Did you come up with one?
I did. Flying Nun.
Oh, the Flying Nun. You just said that, and I totally was thinking we were talking off topic again. Okay, so sorry. I would love to see, and I know this sounds ridiculous, the Bionic Man, but with
Yeah, but with
cyborg
technology.
cyborg capabilities, and kind of like actually Cyborg from the comics, from like Doom Patrol and stuff.
Yeah.
I would love to see that. Mostly because I totally recognize that, like the Bionic Man. Now, see, in the Bionic Man in the 70s or whenever that was, the government was kind of benevolent in some ways, right? I would love to see a show where the Bionic Man, clearly the government is not benevolent and is controlling things that are happening because he's their weapon. There's no way that they would let him just go off and do his own thing because their technology would absolutely override anything, any free will that he might have, and what kind of existential drama would that create? I feel like that could be a really good show. So that's the one that I would pick. Okay, so
That sounds great. I would
all right,
watch it.
all right. So go the other way. Go the other way. What do you think of a show today that would probably do kind of well with maybe a little bit more formulaic uh, treatment to it? Anything?
That's
I know
uh,
that is a tough one. This is definitely a tough one. It's a tough one because because we are very accustomed now to our give us our in-depth characters, give us our wild story arcs and a whole mythic journey and that kind of stuff.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They have their lady detectives, but they could formulate it. They could make it more. I think they could make that more flat.
Yeah.
I think they could flatten it out a little bit.
Okay. What about you, Tori?
I think like shows like Hannah Montana or something like that. Like I don't know. Does
Yeah,
is
does Hannah
that
Montana really need any growth? Because no, she does
no?
not.
No, she doesn't. Like it's simple and like kids don't have they don't have the capacity to sit down and like think about what like the older shows are about nowadays.
Well, that's why shows like Wishbone and all the PBS lineup, Sagwa, and just so many of the sort of episodic repeat of the same storylines, but with different circumstances around them. That's why they do well with kids. That's absolutely why they do with kids. But there is such a thing as character growth in storytelling inside of children's drama, and all we have to do is look to Sesame Street and realize that Elmo is not the same character that Elmo was many years ago as he is today. And you can really see that there's a lot of progressive thought put into how to change these characters in a way that make it work. Like I had a fear, not me personally, I'm speaking about, if you were a kid watching, I had a fear about people that don't look like me. And therefore a character comes on and says, hey, I had that fear too, and here's what I learned. That kind of stuff is actually kind of cool. I do like that. Okay, so I'm not sure if I actually have anything that I think fits in that. I all of the shows that I would want to do that way, I feel like it would just be destroyed by making them episodic. But I would fully embrace an episodic show of knights and like a King Arthur series, not a King Arthur series where it's like, oh my god, there has to be something terrible happening. No, I'm talking about a King Arthur series where, you know, the pond doesn't have enough fish, and so the knights have to go off on a quest to get more fish. I don't know, something stupid like that. But honestly, that makes me happy. That stuff makes me happy. There are just no episodic stories of castles and knights anymore. That does not exist. Okay. I guess this is sort of the wrap-up question. Wrap-up question. Do you feel like TV has done good things? Meaning, do you feel better about content now than you do watching content from the 50s, 60s, and 70s? How do you feel we have progressed? How are we making progress? What's the general state of the difference between TV then and TV now? What about you, Betty?
I would say it's more progressive. Morality has changed, so television has changed to the times. So there's a little bit less sexism and equality because it's more of an issue now.
Okay. What about you, Tori? You're on mute. my dear.
Sorry. When you, how do I want to say it now? Dang it! I had like the perfect thing, that I was on mute. How do I want to say it? Okay, repeat the question again, so I know that I'm answering this right.
How do you feel about the differences between storytelling in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and now? And do you feel like we're doing a better job now of telling stories than we did then? Like where do you fall on the scale? Would you rather have more shows like
Okay,
then?
yeah. Now my thought came back. Okay,
Okay.
so I agree with Betty. Like I agree that it's progressive. So as the society and the world has evolved, so has TV, and so has film, and so has music. So like it it's gone hand in hand with how we are. So yeah. So I think that that's yeah.
So okay, so you think that we are doing a better job now of telling stories than we were
We have a
before?
different yeah, we have a different point of view now, I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that we're doing a better job now of like she said, equality and everything like that, but also like touching on really current issues like Law and Order, ripped from the headlines, like
Right.
it's I I think that's great to because it makes it more relatable, and that gives you more character depth because you can relate to this character a little bit more.
I I agree. I have to say that I think that as we progress societally, I got to say this carefully, because I don't necessarily feel like we are getting more of content. I don't feel like we're getting better content just because we have better formats to tell our stories. At one point when I was younger and more naive, I did feel that way. I did feel like we really had a kind of, or a sense of, um, hey, with all of this new technology, with all the new streaming platforms, hey, we get 10 episodes now, which, I mean, I didn't even get to talk about, but 10 episodes in a series is like ridiculous because we used to have 20, 25, and then exponentially costs began to rise. It's harder to turn a series around if you don't have people working full time on writing staffs, like things like that. Some things really did change in television production. There's no doubt about it. We also don't do so much storytelling that kind of keeps to the same one set, like remember WKRP in Cincinnati?
Yes.
There's like
In
I
Cincinnati.
freaking love that. I don't know. I just saw Howard Hessman someplace, and I was reminded of that. But we don't have so much of that anymore, and so it is very expensive. I think and I'm not saying that we shouldn't expect something great out of the 10 episodes that we get, but it does really feel short, and then you're left wanting until whatever the next series is that comes along. That sometimes feels a little bit hollow.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm watching the Umbrella. Yeah,
Academy,
yeah, the
Umbrella
Umbrella
Academy.
Academy, and like the
Hmm.
first season, I was like, it's only 10 episodes. Like we didn't realize there was a season two, so like we're all like, man, this is over now, and like we're like, oh, they have a second season. Like it was. We were really happy about it. Like it's
This,
stupid, but
this, I feel like we, again, like we have tools to do much better things. We have better FX. We have better, almost better everything. We also have better access to raw talent. I mean, we have people almost literally coming out of the woodwork to work in all kinds of different productions, and we have very talented people. Look on TikTok. I mean,
Oh
people
yeah.
are creative. It's crazy good how expressive people can be. I totally appreciate and honor that. But the caveat of all of this is we aren't actually telling better stories. And I think it shows because every once in a while, the zeitgeist picks up on something that is epic and spectacular and goes, ooh, this is like something we haven't seen before, or we're all so hungry for this story, or whatever. And it kind of shows you what a desert the rest of our content really feels like. Yes, we'll watch it because it's scenery going by, but it isn't the oasis that we're all wanting to drink from. And that generally is, I think, what is kind of stand out about our current field of content. Um, that, and I will say one other thing, which is streaming platforms at this point have so much market share, and there is so much money going into Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Paramount, um, Shutter. There's so much content and money is going in to produce content on these streaming platforms. And as a result, you don't have a captive audience anymore. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were 3 network television channels.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were going to produce something, you had to make sure that it fit on one of those, or possibly PBS. And then cable came in, and cable was
Mm-hmm.
like, ooh, cutting edge, there's something different. And again, if we go back to what we talked about before with the prestige TV thing, this is where we get the HBO doing something a bit different, and offering us a series that, ooh, yeah, you know what, we haven't seen anything like this before. Remember when The Sopranos first came on, or Oz? You
Yes,
know,
Oz, and then 6 Feet Under. I thought about that one today. Like, I really liked that one, and that was kind of like the first Game of Thronesy kind of show that they did.
and we're not even reaching back into the archives
No.
about or with the series that were originally shown on HBO back in the 19 well, even in the 1980s, but I mean prior to that, in the 1980s, original programming on HBO centered a lot around documentaries that nobody else would show, things that other people just would never get to see. And it was really interesting. It's interesting to me now as we look back at all of these things. In fact, there was a show called The Hitchhiker, which was it was kind of like noir esque, and it was super popular for a long time, but it was really cutting edge. For kids, they had Fraggle Rock.
I know, I love Fraggle Rock. Let's
That was
go, Fraggle
so
Rock.
different from anything that anybody had ever seen before.
Mhm.
I think one of the other ones was First and 10. That was one of those series that, like, man, if you liked sports, everybody was watching First and 10. Um, and what was the other one that I was thinking of? Oh, the Ray Bradbury Theater, which was an anthology series that basically was like 65 episodes of stories that Ray Bradbury talked about process for, like, let us look behind the curtain of the writing process. It was super cool, very very good.
Kind of
We
like
don't
inside the actor's studio now, but
Yeah, a
like,
little bit, but with Ray Bradbury, who was
got
just
it.
absolutely brilliant. I mean, not that Lipton was not brilliant too, but I mean, in terms of producing content, Ray Bradbury really produced a lot of good content. So I know it's time to close up the show, but I wanted to mention that our next show is going to be about representation. Are we doing enough? What kind of tropes are we seeing that maybe buy into certain types of representation and what we don't? Now, I realize that this is an extremely contentious topic. It shouldn't be, but it is. And I do really want to focus on what it is that we find so offensive about, as an example, God, I'm going to get hate mail on this one. Why are we having such a hard time with death in Sandman being black? Why are we having a difficult time with a black dwarf in The Lord of the Rings, The Rings
Oh,
of
and
Power?
also the black Sith from Obi-Wan.
Yes.
They had a
Yes,
real
yes.
problem with that one.
She was black and a woman, and that was double the trouble. Just a whole bunch of those types of things. Women in roles that men normally occupy, that
Yep.
oftentimes becomes just a crazy firestorm on social media. But anyway, I want to talk, and I also want to talk about sexual orientation and whether sexual orientation is being represented enough. And the answer obviously is no. But let's talk a little bit about why we think that might be happening and how the wheels of change might be sort of moving in that direction. So I think that's going to be a really interesting show. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it. In closing, I do want to say that this is a great episode. Thank you so much for participating. I think that TV has definitely moved in a progressive, good direction. I am a little bit concerned about where we are just in terms of the amount of content that's coming out. But when we talk about the golden age of television, even though we say that the golden age of television has come to a close, I don't think that that precludes us from thinking about what the dawn of the next age of television is via streaming content, and what we might see from that as really pillars of greatness. We could really see some great stuff coming out. So I am ever optimistic about TV. Betty, how can we find you on social media?
TikTok and Instagram at Betty Chitty Bang Bang at Betty Chitty Bang Bang. Yes.
And don't bother to contact Betty, at least for the next couple of hours, as I know that she's going to hop off and play The Last of Us. So I'm super excited to hear what she's got to say about it.
I'm actually playing a game that I got for free with it, Horizon West.
Horizon West. Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. And also, as soon as we get to the part where The Last of Us airs, you'll know plenty about it, so you can talk with authority about how you feel. Yes, I'm sure it's going to be great. All right, Tori, how can we find you on social media?
Okay, so you can find me on Facebook at Tori Rush, or you can find me on Instagram at Rush Tori. I don't know how to change my name to Tori Rush on Instagram. I know it's really easy. I'll figure it out. I just haven't done it yet. My show, The Infectious Geek, is on a hiatus right now, only because well, I got in trouble for a Jeffrey Dahmer meme that I posted like 2 years ago on Facebook. So they banned me for the same meme,
God.
twice, and 30 days each time that I couldn't go live. So I'm really bummed because I was like, I could always stream it to my YouTube channel, but nobody's gonna watch it. So like I was pretty bummed. But it'll come back soon, and then we can all talk about all my good stuff coming up.
Censorship.
Yes.
So next week's episode, we fully intend to see Tori dressed in prison stripes because she's in Facebook jail.
Yes.
So. And you can find me at moviesandmeals.com. Just a quick shout out that moviesandmeals.com is in its Halloween countdown already. Never let anybody tell you that it's too early for Halloween. We have close to 99 different recipes between now and Halloween that are related to horror movies, scary movies, kids movies that are great for Halloween, all kinds of fun stuff. It's going to be a really good time between now and October 31st. Hope you join me there. As always, thank you so much. Thank you to my cast. Thank you so much, Tori. Also, oh my gosh, thank you, Josh. I'm so sorry. Friday nights, we have a new podcast premiering called 10 to 1. It is going to be super fun. We have a list. It's a list show. This week's list is the top 10 movies, or our top 10 movies, of best friends, movies about best friends. I am
Charlotte better
sure.
be in that.
Oh yes. Also, I already told. Well, see, now we're doing spoilers, but I said Bridge to Terabithia because that is one of my all-time favorite best friend movies. I just love it. Can't wait to hear what Josh has to say. I'm sure we won't have very much crossover, uh, but I'm sure it's going to be fun. So that's Friday nights, right before the Wadcast, right here where you see this podcast. All right. I will talk to you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.